Good evening, welcome back to the programme. So Professor Colin Waters is a technical acoustic advisor to the 51M Alliance Against HS2. Adrian Lyons is a rail expert and former Director General of the Railway Forum. Can you hear us, Adrian?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can indeed. Thank you for joining us. Joe Rukin is the campaigns director of Stop HS2, and Seb Berry is independent councillor, anti-HS2 ticket. Was that why you were elected, Seb?
Pretty much so. There were other issues, including, for example, we're sitting in the library here, and indeed that was a key issue in the campaign. But yes, certainly HS2 was the main, by far the biggest issue in the campaign here. Okay.
Lots of questions from the audience here this evening, of course. Can we start with the politics of all this? How will HS2, going back to what you just said there, Seb, how will people vote in future? Are many considering, for instance, not voting Conservatives, a Conservative heartland, of course, and switching allegiance to maybe UKIP or Independent, do you think?
Well, I think the proposition that a coalition government elected on essentially an austerity package platform that then spends, in this scenario, 5 years of a parliament ramming HS2 down the throats of local people. The proposition that they can do that and that has no impact on the way people vote at the next election is a rather extraordinary one. So I think the question you should be posing is to the coalition parties to explain how they think that can possibly be the case.
Joe Rukin, we've spoken many times before. You've a strong campaigner against this. What's your view on the politics of all this?
Well, absolutely. The mainstream parties have backed HS2 at leadership level. It's fair to say that not just, obviously, there's the Conservative rebellion along the line, but there's lots of MPs, especially, say, Old Labour, looking at this on a social justice grounds, who are wavering very much so. Even ones off the line, like the Conservative MP for Winchester recently said that he believed that this was a white elephant. But yeah, we've seen this. In the areas down the south, we've seen there has been a move to independents like Seb, also UKIP, and at the northern end, for example, Solihull Metropolitan Borough, you've seen a big swing to the Greens as well, because both UKIP and the Greens are opposing HS2, and the mainstream political parties, obviously, there is a very big chance that, not before the general election, but in the council elections coming up next year, that they're going to see that there's going to be more independent candidates standing, or potentially their votes are going to go to the Greens or UKIP in these areas.
We do have on the panel tonight two acoustic experts, Professor Colin Waters and Giles Parker, we heard from earlier, and we'll come back to those gentlemen with questions related to the sound element of all this. Adrian Lyons, rail expert and former Director General of the Railway Forum. What do you make of the politics of all this? Because this idea was dreamt up, of course, by Lord Adonis, unelected minister, if I remember rightly.
Yes, very effective one, though, I think. And I think we've also got to be... Well, I'm the only one for the motion, if you like. But look, it's easy enough to find groups that are very worried about the impact of HS2, but and I think there's a bigger issue of the whole approach to national infrastructure. And as far as I'm concerned, a high-speed rail is probably the best way and the least intrusive, and I know there are huge problems in Great Missenden, but it is the least intrusive compared with road and air to solve some of our really pressing national economic and social problems. And it isn't just for this period of austerity we're talking about, but it's for the long term. And I think it's very bold of the government to be making these moves now to make sure that we've got something up and running that can help Britain grow and help solve the irredeemable problems at present between the variation between the north and the south.
But Adrian, someone suggested earlier, but perhaps not an issue except with high-speed rail, but why not site it somewhere else alongside the M40 corridor, maybe even run it from Heathrow, which is quite an important hub, straight into the heart of Birmingham and avoid the Chilterns as best as possible?
Well, I think the M40 alignment causes great problems because the M40 is built in the modern wiggly motorway style, and one of the things you want with high-speed rail is as straight an alignment as possible. You can take significant gradients, but you can't turn corners with it because great masses going at 200 miles an hour have great problems doing that. Look,
to travel at 225 miles an hour to save 25 minutes.
No,
I'd rather read a paper.
but it's more than that, isn't it? I think you're talking. trying to make journeys, the London-Birmingham journey, the paradigm for high-speed rail in time saving is probably not the way to look at it. It's the longer journeys, but more importantly, what you're doing is you're actually providing significant additional capacity to the national railway network, which I think will reap huge benefits, not just for those travelling on high speed, but on the West Coast Main Line and on Chiltern as well.
Adrian, let me just tell you, there's a lot of comment coming in from the room as well. The lady again, was it Emma?
No, I'm Mott Denson.
All right.
I just wanted to say, obviously in the news at the moment, there's a lot about airport capacity, and I'm really confused. I mean, it's like there's no joined-up thinking here. They're talking about a high-speed line that doesn't link to an airport, which they may add extra runways. I think the whole thing needs looking at. We need a transport strategy to go on with. I just think high-speed rail at the moment looks like silo planning. It makes no sense.
The gentleman in the mustard-coloured top, your comment, please.
Thank you. Well, I think it's on the same lines. I mean, what this country needs is a national transportation infrastructure plan before we do things. We're talking about where are we going to put runways. Well, I'd have thought you put the runways, you sort out where the runways are, and then you connect them. If we need more capacity on our railways, let's get high-speed rail. But before we do that, the other thing we have to sort out on road and rail is freight. That is the biggest saver for CO2 in the country.
Seb, what's your take on this? Why don't we have an integrated transport policy where actually we join up all the dots?
Well, one of the reasons we don't is because we have a NIMBY Secretary of State for Transport who, as we well know, puts her constituency first when it suits her and ignores the results of a national consultation on another issue when it doesn't. So that's one of the reasons we don't have an integrated transport policy. But I just wanted to pick up on this point about priorities, because if you actually, I go back to my opening remarks, we are constantly told that there is no money for anything. We have an austerity government which is cutting everything. In the last 2 years, 50,000 people have lost their jobs in the NHS. 20,000 troops have been told that they've got to go. We've lost 5,000 frontline police officers. The list goes on and on and on. The suggestion that it's more of a priority to fund a bloated quango, which is what HS2 Limited is, including, I have to say, people are on very, very significant salaries, some of whom are literally 10 seconds away from this building and who will not join this live debate, is an absolute disgrace.
Can I just bring Adrian Lyons into the conversation? Adrian, this idea of joining up the dots when it comes to a transport system, why aren't we doing that?
I think there's some very important issues raised, and there's an element of where I agree with the need for an integrated transport policy. But I believe that the current HS2 alignment is one that makes sense as part of the beginning of a national high-speed network. There are variant routes, and I think there needs to be a very clear view of whether Heathrow is connected or not. I personally believe that it doesn't need to be, because I believe a station somewhere just to the west of Paddington will probably meet the requirements. But yes, I think there needs to be more explanation about where HS2 goes as it develops. I think there's probably been some criticism that some of the ideas which integrate HS2 more into the national rail network haven't been explored sufficiently, and I think that they would probably gain significant greater support if they were.
Why haven't they integrated it properly? Why haven't they thought about that?
Well, I'm not sure. I think there's always a worry that once you start to launch a hybrid bill, you want to keep with what you've got, and you don't want to put any more, let's say, hostages to fortune about integrating the railway further into the national network. But I think there ought to be a look at whether there's some need for a station between London and Birmingham. I think there needs to be a way of whether you have an integration of relatively high-speed services, such have occurred in Kent, where a very successful Javelin service links at Ashford with a whole group of towns in Kent, and significantly improved commuting times. And I think there needs to be more of a debate like that, and I think it would be helpful if HS2 were to have one.
Well, if I can come in there, Adrian has said,
Joe.
That we need to look at how these things fit into a strategy. And realistically, what you should be doing is developing a strategy and then deciding what you need. It says this is the start of a national high-speed network. Well, have we actually ever got to a point where we decided we need a high-speed rail network? Like the Transport Select Committee recently decided, well, their own words, that the work of the Department for Transport sits in a strategic vacuum. They simply are project-based. They come up with different projects and they decide, this is what we're going to do. In terms of a joined-up strategy, it does not exist whatsoever.
This is Drive.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
We'll talk to Alan Walker, also about noise. Alan, yes.
Good evening. To the noise experts, has any technical data been obtained regarding the converging pressure waves of two high-speed trains at a closing speed of well in excess of 400 miles an hour? Surely it's going to be a bit more than just a whoosh.
Professor Colin Waters.
Well, it's a very valid point that you raised. There's so many detailed points that haven't been examined up to this point that all we have at the moment is very much an overarching examination of preliminary studies of what the noise could possibly be. We're about to embark on an EIA, an environmental impact assessment, which will look in detail at various other things. But it has to be said that up to this point, the detail that's been supplied has been very little. And that's really what's causing most of the problem, because people just do not know what the likely noise impact is likely to be with HS2.
Would it not be similar to HS1?
Well, it'll be a train, but HS1 is slower. There are not as many an hour. It's in a different type of route. So yes, it's train noise, and there are obviously basic similarities, but the real differences are the very much higher speed and the very much higher numbers of occurrences that'll happen in any 1 hour.
Okay. Adrian Lyons, Rail Expert and former Director General of the Railway Forum. What will these trains sound like, do you know?
I must say, I'm very surprised by that. I think HS1 is the paradigm of what high-speed lines are going to be like. And actually, what has been, I think, extremely interesting in Kent, where it's a very similar environment to that we're coming across in the Chilterns, that by and large the impact of HS1 has not been as bad as people feared.
A lot of people in the room would disagree with you, Adrian.
Well, I'm sorry, but you know, in essence, what the high-speed lines, there's a slightly greater speed, there might be a slightly greater density of services, but again, I'm not quite so sure that's going to be the case. The impact is well understood. Clearly, it has to be mitigated, and that's the big argument, and that's what I would look the environmental impact assessments to do, not to produce some new facts that are going to be very surprising, but providing data and information that helps engineers mitigate the sound impact of HS2.
Adrian, let me bring Charles Parker into the conversation. He's from Sound Barrier Solutions. Again, you deal with acoustic elements. We spoke earlier on.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I'm just looking at the EIA scope and methodology, which was the document produced by Arup and URS, which will help give a guide to the approach that will be taken for mitigation. There's one sentence on noise mitigation in the whole report. I can read it to you if you like. It says, sound levels from the operational railway may be reduced through the performance specification of the rolling stock, infrastructure and environmental barriers. That's all they're saying. So in terms of...
What does that mean?
It basically means they haven't actually defined anything whatsoever.
But what about this great video on the HS2 website, this train whooshing through the countryside? Doesn't it sound like that?
And making no noise whatsoever.
It doesn't make a lot of noise. It has to be said. It's a very silent train.
I think you have to bring in the point made before about what was actually happening in Kent, where they're using an existing transport line. And you look at in terms of a change in perception for people. I heard one comment on for the HS1 where he said, you know, I can't quite remember what it was like before. I feel like I got used to it. Wouldn't it be a tragedy if people said the same thing for HS2? They said, you know, we can't quite remember what it was like when it was tranquil, when it was nice before. Because what you're doing is you're breaking up what is currently a tranquil environment. That is the main difference.
Professor Colin Waters, you're a technical acoustic advisor to the 51M Alliance Against HS2. Why haven't they established the noise, the acoustic element of all this?
Well, I've been asking this same question for must be 2 years now, and I've been asking for a very simple piece of information, which is a set of contours which shows what the noise is likely to be like at some distances from the route. I was promised them 18 months ago. They will be out when the appraisal of sustainability will be published. They weren't. They will come along when the EIA is published, and we've been promised those again, but at the moment I've seen none of them. Now, if they haven't been produced, then they most certainly should have been, because it's a basic tool for any design analysis or proving of a route, that you know what the noise is likely to be. And there's one further thing which I think is equally important. We don't yet know what method the HS2 Limited will be using for assessment. We don't know what they will be mitigating to. They say they will mitigate, but they might mitigate down to a level which is totally unacceptable.
Okay.
None of this has been told to us yet.
Colin, thank you. It's 23 and a half minutes past 6 o'clock. Before I come, there will be people listening. I think everyone, am I right in assuming that everyone in the room is anti-HS2? Yes. Okay. There'll be people listening thinking, look at those posh people in that nice part of Buckinghamshire. They don't want their backyards disturbed. They're just NIMBYs. Are you NIMBYs? No. Okay, I think we've answered that one. Right. Let's talk to Alison Doggett, who's chairman of the Children's Society. Alison, what are your concerns?
I'd like to follow up on some of the things that Colin was saying about noise mitigation. And I think one of the things that is a serious problem at the moment and is being researched at the University of Southampton with a 3.1 million grant is what they're going to run the track on. They've had enormous problems with this line on trying to run these extraordinarily fast lines on what we call ballast track, the little stones that we're used to on railway lines. And in fact, what happens is they fly everywhere. This hasn't been solved, this particular problem. Professor Powery and Professor Priest, who've been working on it at the University of Southampton, and I quote, migrating and flying ballast, at present the cause is not understood. Is it mechanical, aerodynamic, or a combination? So the reason that we're not getting any data is that, as yet, they don't have a track base.
Well, let's ask Adrian Lyons, who's a rail expert and former Director General of the Railway Forum. Adrian, do they know what they're doing here?
Yeah, well, I'm very surprised. Again, I'm hearing a number of statements which seem extraordinarily out of context, that these are issues which are normally done.
Right. Adrian, can I just tell you? At 7 o'clock this evening, there is a meeting organised by HS2, literally a few hundred yards from where we are. They could come in, they could have their say and explain exactly what their project is, but they don't want to come in, and I can't work out why. Surely they want to address the wider audience, don't they?
I'm personally surprised as well, because these vast projects, these very big projects, are complex, and they raise some very significant issues which clearly have got to be addressed. I'm firmly of the belief this country requires high-speed rail, because I believe it will fundamentally change economic and social factors and make a major contribution to the betterment of the country. But there are a number of major problems that have to be overcome before we build such a railway, and it's clearly that work has to be done. Now, flying ballast, I don't know what's being meant by flying ballast. There is potentially some ballast movement on all railways, but how far the ballast flies is a matter of feet rather than any great distance. And of course, there are a huge number of new track developments of making lines more stable and quieter and faster, which are under development. And I would hope that the technology used on HS2 is going to be the one that both mitigates the impact of the railway.
Are they developing the technology? Can't they just, if they are going to build HS2, can't they just buy in the technology from Japan, for example, with their high-speed system?
And of course, the French network. There's more than 3,000 miles of high-speed railway in Europe already. The technologies exist, but if they can be improved further, and they are evolving, let's bring the best practice onto HS2. And I think that all that best practice will reduce these various impacts. Now, I'm staggered that an academic can tell me that he doesn't understand what are the potential causes for flying ballast, because common sense should tell you what the potential causes for flying ballast are.
Let's talk to Simon Morris. Simon is from the Chiltern Ridges Action Group. Simon, what's your view?
I want to ask Mr. Lyons why he seems to think that the only solution to a lack of capacity on our rail network is from having high-speed rail. This is not true. You can quite easily, there's been a lot of work done by a group called 51M, a group of councils, showing how the existing rail network can be enhanced so that it can deal with the required capacity. And this absolute myth that you have to have high-speed rail to provide the capacity has been put forward by HS2 Limited, and the alternatives have not been properly looked at.
Would you care as much, Simon, if HS2 wasn't coming through this part of the world?
I care because this, I must say, I only looked at this because I live very close, so one takes notice of it. I am very concerned. There's people like us who look at it and understand what's happening and realise what a desperately bad investment it is, whereas there are 80% of the electorate who hear the platitudes put forward by politicians. I cannot understand how the politicians can get up on their hind legs and tell the world that they have to have HS2, that HS2 for a long time, in December last year, Hammond was saying that the benefit cost ratio was 2.4. He knew that a month after that, it will be revealed that it had dropped to 1.4 and now 1.2. I mean, why do these statements get made? They can only get made to deceive the electorate, as far as I can see. Well, they would dispute that.
Simon, let me bring Adrian into the conversation. Adrian, the financial, the figures don't really seem to stack up, and they keep changing. Why? I mean, surely if they bring in this project to the table, you'd have thought they'd have their financial situation absolutely concrete, sound and concrete.
A couple of points. I think the 51M work, which is trying to find ways out of the HS2 paper bag, if you like, isn't sound. I think it makes far too many assumptions, and I think it also doesn't look far enough ahead. Well, if you're going to claim that HS2, I'm sorry, look, if HS2 is you're claiming the work isn't being done properly, I think you must look to if other groups produce work, it must be subjected to the same level of criticism, and I don't believe the F51M work's particularly good. Now,
what does the Accounts Committee do for you in terms of looking at the work that's been done and accepting the criticism? How does the Public Accounts Committee or the Major Projects Authority or the National Audit Office, who have all looked into HS2 independently and in the cold light of day, you're saying that the 51M proposal has to be looked at, that you have had absolutely damning criticism from these organisations. And not only that, we were just talking about the benefit cost ratio, say, came down from 2.4 to 1.6 to 1.4 to 1.2. And last month we had the Freedom of Information request came out, which showed that the Department for Transport, in terms of the cost benefit and the value of time, i.e. this absolutely ludicrous concept that no one works on a train, they have set. We realised that since 2009, when the research that absolutely destroyed the business case for HS2 was done, they suppressed it and they were told to sit on it. And basically, we know now that they have been lying from the start.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Good evening, this is Drive Time. We are live in the library in Great Missenden. We're here to talk HS2. Greg Porter. Greg, very good evening. What's your question?
Greg Porter here. I'd like to ask Adrian Lyons, if I may, that we hear an awful lot about the benefits of spending £32 billion per se, but there's these social benefits and the economic benefits. Would you like to comment and clarify what those exactly are for £32 billion?
We can widen the question and ask the question, is this project value for money? The government says it will invest over £32 billion in the project. It says it will bring almost £47 billion of economic benefits over a period of 6 decades. Adrian, what's your take on that?
Yes, well, I think there is a big question to answer about the cost of the project, and it was actually mentioned in the HS2 initial document that the cost of building this railway in comparison with other high-speed lines across the world is staggeringly high. Now, I think there's two challenges. One is that the railway industry and its contractors have really got to challenge their value for money. But also the whole process that we go through is just so extraordinarily costly and has so many additional elements to it that we really have to ask some very serious questions about how do we run these major projects. And to end up with a railway that costs £80 million a mile, as opposed to Spain, where it's about a quarter of the cost, is I think, a major national question that we have to ask ourselves. Now, on the wider social and social economic benefits, quite frankly, I think we've all got to accept, when you're dealing with a project of this size, that it's almost, you can make a stab at social and economic benefits, but there's got to be some sort of national will to build such a network. It isn't something you can price directly. You can price a bypass, Adrian, but you can't price a high-speed railway.
Is the will there? I mean, I'm staggered to hear that it is significantly more expensive than building a high-speed rail system in Spain. Why?
I think it's our whole approach to the problem. We do seem to create extremely complex project processes, and we don't seem to be very good at delivering value for money on rail. Now, the rail industry is under the cosh as a result of Sir Roy McNulty's review to show it can do better. And I would think it would be extremely interesting if High Speed 2 could challenge itself to see how it could bring costs down. Because with the very high costs, inevitably the cost-benefit ratio does tend to look not particularly good using the current methodology.
I think you engage reaction from the audience. Adrian, thank you. Let's talk. Martin Tett joins us now. Martin is the leader of Buckinghamshire County Council, chair of the 51M Alliance against HS2, very much against it would seem, HS2. Martin, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
What's your current view on all this?
I think it's a prestige project, quite frankly. I think what we've got is politicians who've fallen, as others have in the past, for Concorde and the Millennium Dome, and they believe there's a silver bullet that will transform the country. And I think it's an illusion, quite frankly. I can understand why politicians fall for it, but I think it's an absolute illusion. The country's problems are far more profound than that.
But Martin, why would they fall for it? You look at the cost. They haven't really worked this out. They haven't really designed the train system. They don't know what the implication to the environment is. They just seem to be plucking figures and solutions out of the air. There's nothing concrete here.
I agree with you. I think that's exactly the point. And I was just listening, stuck in traffic on the way here, some of your debates so far. And, the gentleman who's in favour of HS2 was talking about, speed. I've spoken to Philip Hammond, and the government's arguments on this just move around all the time. Those of us who followed this over the last 2 years, it started with speed. It was all about speed. It had to be about saving that 20 minutes getting to Birmingham because it was worth billions to the economy. And even HS2 don't defend that now because that whole argument has completely collapsed and fallen apart. They know that is absolutely ludicrous. And I think it was, I don't know if it was Seb, somebody was saying just now, we've discovered a report from 2009 that says that whole premise is, quote, unsustainable, unsupportable. So they knew it was unsupportable when that business case was put out. Then they moved on to capacity and said, it's all about capacity. Well, if it is, two things. First of all, why won't they release the actual load factors on the trains at the moment? Why is it so secret that they won't tell us what they are? And we've tried FOIing it, they just won't tell us.
Why?
So, well, absolutely. Why? It's a really good question.
Joe, hang on. Who's your local MP?
We have a number of MPs along the line, as you know.
They're all
and we've
Tories.
asked, most
Why
of them.
don't they
No. We, as 51M, we stretch from Camden to Coventry,
okay, of course,
and from London to Leicester.
But
there are a number of Labour MPs.
But in Buckinghamshire, which is fairly blue, Tory, of course, why don't your MPs aren't ask these questions?
We've asked them, and they have asked as well. I mean, the situation is...
So they're not answering the MPs' questions?
The HS2 Limited and the DFT will not release the information on load factors. And I was on the Daily Politics last week, and I challenged Grant Shapps directly to release that information, and he declined to do so. How can the government argue it's a capacity issue if they won't release the basic information that shows there's a capacity problem?
Joe?
Well, I was just going to say, the Department for Transport, Virgin Trains, London Midland are saying that those figures are commercially confidential, which I find, bearing in mind that Virgin Trains franchise is up for renewal this year, they're saying the actual passenger figures are commercially confidential, so they won't even let those figures out to the other people bidding for the franchise. And this is one of the things that's ridiculous about this whole capacity argument. The only thing that we've got, besides the independent studies that have happened, is the rail utilisation strategy report, which showed, in terms of the London stations, the second least busy was Euston, with loading factors of 60 to 64%. The least busy was the High-Speed Rail 1 service into St Pancras. There are 5 stations in London, like Paddington, Victoria, Waterloo, that are over 100% capacity in peak hours. The whole problem that we face here is that politicians have decided high-speed rail is the answer. We've got to have it, and therefore, what is the question? Because the thing is, if you were addressing capacity, the very, very last place you would look at doing any work on is the West Coast Main Line. And part of the problem with the West Coast Main Line, of course, is that in 2006, the upgrade was delivered on the West Coast Main Line. We were meant to get this Virgin high-frequency train pattern, which never materialised because Virgin did a deal with London Midland to keep London Midland's slower trains on the fast line. So, actually, you've spent about £10 billion on the upgrade of the West Coast Main Line, and you've not got the service, not because we, the taxpayer, haven't paid for that upgrade, but because of the failure of the fragmentisation that privatisation has brought.
Joe, you're the campaigns director of Stop HS2. You seem to be an expert on all things HS2. Is this your profession, or have you been drawn into it?
Very much drawn into it. Very much drawn into it. I've got a campaigns background from working with the National Union of Students for a number of years, and that actually is one of the reasons that turned me off politics, because I saw the next generation of politicians coming through, and having met them and dealt with them, and some of them coming across again in this whole argument, I can understand why they've fallen for this argument, because the three words high-speed rail sound like it must be a really good idea, and then you read the documents, and I can't believe the number of politicians I've been talking to who've been supporting HS2 who know absolutely nothing about it whatsoever and will just roll off. And all they can do is roll off a load of sound bites, and none of them hold any water, and it's irresponsible to be spending this money on this.
Let's talk to that new generation of politicians. Seb Berry, independent councillor, what's your take on this?
Well, I think Martin's point earlier raises an even wider issue, which is about secrecy and openness in government, because here we have a government, if you recall, that was elected committed to more openness, more transparency, and it's a fact that the Public Accounts Committee of the House of Commons, no less, only found out about the amber red warning from the Major Projects Authority almost by chance, just by grilling DFT officials in a hearing. And whatever else Margaret Hodge can be described as, who's the Labour chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, a Chiltern NIMBY she most certainly is not.
Adrian Lyons, rail expert and former Director General of the Railway. Why can't we convince these people in this room that HS2 is a good idea, and why won't HS2 answer the questions that people are asking?
Well, I'm just... I'm very worried with the debate that's gone, because I've just heard a sort of a succession of assertions which... I'm genuinely surprised that information which I know that's available on future passenger growth, on capacity constraints on the railways. And somebody was honest enough to mention the rail utilisation studies, which, for better or for worse, are an attempt to grapple with a very complex problem. There's a great deal of information out in the public domain. There's a railway capacity problem that needs to be solved, and HS2 looks to be one of the most elegant ways of solving a particular part, not all, a particular part of the railway capacity problem. The other issue, though, is if there's a belief that there's a disparity of economic opportunity and social opportunity in this country, and that part of it is caused by poor transport infrastructure, HS2 again looks an extremely elegant way of solving that problem. Or I'd be a major contribution to it. Now, those two issues, I think, are...
Adrian, let me bring Martin Tett back into the conversation as leader of Bucks County Council. It's an elegant way of transporting people.
Well, I think that's a beautiful description. Elegant. I mean, it's an elegant way of spending £33 billion worth of hard-pressed taxpayers' money, at a time of major national austerity. And I think any government, and it would be different if this was private money, but, this is government money, it's taxpayers' money. And I think they have a duty to prove that it's value for money. If there is a capacity question, then what is also the case is that the alternative that we put forward will meet all of the capacity requirements from natural growth on that line, and that's been agreed by HS2 and the government in the consultation. And it will do it for £3 billion. And it actually has, and I heard the comment earlier about, its BCR's gone down, best benefit cost ratio. Yes, it has, but it's still 5 times the value for money of High Speed 2. So I cannot understand why, if you want to meet the capacity at the lowest possible cost to the taxpayer, you do not go for our option.
Hey, Martin, just ask you, you're chair of the 51M Alliance Against HS2. Just explain to our listeners what this alliance actually stands for.
51M is called 51M. It's an alliance of 19 local authorities from Camden to Coventry, London to Leicester, all the way along the line. It's called 51M because we've worked out that for every single parliamentary constituency in the country, and that includes Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, where it's devolved, it will cost £51 million for every single constituency to build this line. And recently I said that to somebody, and they were absolutely shocked because they assumed it meant
Have you got-
51 million
hang on.
for the lines, the
Have you got
constituencies
that
along the line.
51 million for
Every single constituency. So if you're in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, anywhere, it's going to cost you £51 million to build this railway line.
And all these local authorities are part of this alliance. You're using taxpayers' money to fight the government, basically.
It's the only option we've got. Quite frankly, the government's spending nearly £800 million of taxpayers' money to promote this scheme. Collectively between 19 authorities, we're going to be spending probably around £1 million, but that's good money over 3 years to actually resist this scheme on behalf of our ratepayers. And we do so with a heavy heart, quite frankly. But when you look at the imbalance of resources on both sides, we just don't believe we have an option.
Roberto Perrone.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
We're live in Great Missenden in the library. There is a meeting taking place just after 7 o'clock across the road from where we are, chaired by HS2, but unfortunately they can't join us or won't join us for some strange reason. My panel this evening, Martin Tett, leader of Bucks County Council, chair of the 51M Alliance, Joe Rukin. Rukin is the campaigns director of Stop HS2, Professor Colin Waters, who's an acoustic advisor to the 51M Alliance, and Seb Berry, independent councillor, stood on a very much on an anti-HS2 ticket, and Adrian Lyons, rail expert and former director general of the Railway Forum. And Adrian is not from HS2, but unfortunately you're having to defend, it would seem, this high-speed system all on your own, Adrian. I'm beginning to feel for you because there's not a lot of love in the room for you at the moment, I'm afraid.
I say, yes, I don't feel the warmth.
Just a couple, and thank you for all the messages. Sean in Bedfordshire says, HS2 will be great for this country. We have lagged behind the rest of Europe on high-speed rail for decades. If the Victorians listened to NIMBYs, we wouldn't have the infrastructure we overuse now. Seb, do you want to answer that quickly?
Yeah, if the Victorians were here now, Justin Greening talks a lot about the Victorians, they'd be putting in place the cutting-edge technology, and the cutting-edge technology, of course, is not trains and railways. It's high-speed video conferencing and the rest. That's what the Victorians would be doing.
Would we use this technology to transport ancient woodland, as Justin Greening has said in the past?
Yes, because
I'm very curious how she wants to do that.
It is entirely possible to move ancient woodland, as we know. No, I mean, obviously that was the most ridiculous decision yet to come out of the Department for Transport.
Vivian has a question. Vivian, good evening to you.
Hello.
What's your
Vivian
question?
Salisbury. Recent reports indicate that the reported overcrowding on the West Coast Main Line only relates to trains where cheaper tickets are available. Overall, demand is 60% of capacity, and this is before the longer 11-coach trains are introduced. Last week, I travelled for an on-site meeting in Cumbria. It's unusual because usually we do teleconferencing and we do Skyping.
Right.
But we needed an on-site meeting. It took me just 2 hours and 21 minutes from Milton Keynes to get there. At no point were the many first-class carriages even half full. Is HS2 truly necessary?
Joe, Rukin.
Yeah, well, this is a thing that we've said from the start. Again, the Public Accounts Committee backed this up just last week, that there are so many holes with the case for HS2 and so many mistakes that they are repeating, whereby with HS1 they didn't look at the competition potentially put forward with the cheap flights, with ferries. With HS2, they've not looked at the threats not only of the idea that we should be investing, in local transport solutions, but they've just not looked at how video conferencing, how Skype, how this sort of interactive technology is going to change the world and
Joe,
the need to travel.
Martin, you were on a programme, I think you were on Newsnight with some comments. Grant Shapps was there, as always, the camera's there, he'll turn up. And, of course, the other people, who was it? It was Waterman.
Pete Waterman.
Pete Waterman.
Yeah,
great lover of trains, saying if you build it...
Very sensible, rational guy.
Well, he said, look, the base of his argument was if you build this high-speed rail network too, people will use it.
Yeah, the
Didn't
better
happen with
mousetrap.
HS1. Didn't happen with HS1. It's a third of capacity.
I think Joe's absolutely right. I mean, the issue here is basically every mistake they made with HS1, they're now repeating with HS2. And I think many of us who've been in business know what happens. You know, you have an MD or a chairman who turns up one day and says, I've got a dream. We're going to do X. Now write me the business case, right? And this is exactly where we are. Poor old DFT have been told basically to write a business case for this thing, and they've got to somehow engineer the numbers. So when they forecast the capacity on this, they looked at demand forecasts. Originally, they plateaued them at 2033. When the numbers went down elsewhere, what did they do? Oh, they extended it until 2043 before they plateaued the numbers. Added another 10 years. What was the rationale? Oh, they had to get the numbers to add up. So this sort of manipulation of the business case is just characteristic of the way this whole thing has moved around. The business case has been driven top down. It's very obvious to anyone who's really looked at this.
Okay, can I just say, we are here because it is 6 months since the HS2 decision was announced by the government. There is a meeting chaired by the HS2 people literally across the road. For some reason they don't want to join us, which I do find rather unusual, because that's why we're here. However, Adrian Lyons is rail expert and former Director General of the Railway Forum. You're having almost to defend high-speed rail all on your own, Adrian. Can we put this into some sort of historical context? When the Victorians started embarking on their huge infrastructure project, what was the view then?
Well, there was huge resistance to it, but I almost don't want to dwell on that because, you know, historical anecdotes fill up the time but don't actually address key issues. But I'm very surprised this complete disbelief in any potential passenger growth on transport systems. We've got a major problem on our hands in Britain. We've got a very rapidly rising population. I think we're approaching 70 million at a speed which is quite worrying. We've got a railway network which is clearly showing levels of growth which are completely unexpected and unanticipated 10 years ago, and are continuing despite a downturn in the economy. There seems to be a shift running from road to rail, which is beginning to become significant. Now, anybody who's trying to deny that and say that somehow we'll get out of our problems with a bit of IT connectivity and just hope that people just won't turn up, I think is not doing the future any justice.
Adrian, HS2, if it does get built, will people use it? Because the question is, why aren't they using HS1 in big numbers?
Well, they are, and HS1 numbers are going up, and also, of course, HS1 has provided a wonderful platform for this Javelin service used by South East Trains into Kent, which has revolutionised commuter travel in Kent. The passenger growth will be there.
Joe Rukin, you're...
Yeah. Right. First, there's a few points. This is one of the great bits of spin that we keep getting from the HS2 campaign, in that there's been this growth in rail travel. Yes, there has, but the majority of this has been on discounted tickets, which HS2 will definitely not be, and on local transport. The other thing is with HS1, it's revolutionised commuting. Yeah, it's made it a lot worse for the majority of commuters, because what has happened with the Javelin trains going into Ebbsfleet and Ashford is the rest of the commuter network has been downgraded, the trains are slower, to try and force people onto HS1, and that hasn't worked. At the moment, according to the original forecast, and the Public Accounts Committee back us up on this one, there should be 25 million people on HS1 at the moment. There's 9. Right?
Okay,
and that means that the taxpayer has lumbered with a massive bill.
Adrian, is this all part of a conspiracy theory against high-speed rail?
No, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think I'm worried that statistics are plucked out of the air, and from them is constructed a complete case. Because the case that
HS2 are plucking figures out the air, Adrian.
Well, at least HS2 have got the honesty to write them down and have them examined. And I think there's a key debate to be had there. But look, there is going to be public transport growth. There's going to be public transport growth not only on commuting, but on longer distance travel. And handling that and managing that and putting additional freight on rail is creating huge strains on the railway network. As I come back to the point I made earlier, HS2 provides a significant part of the answer.
Just going back to the floor, we are almost running out of time now, and I appreciate there's a lot of people here who want to ask a lot more questions. One more from the lady with the blue jacket. Yes.
I just want to go back to the Victorian railways and the fact that the big difference is that obviously it was the Industrial Revolution. They weren't railways, so they were the first railways. We do now have good links to Birmingham and other major cities, and the big difference is that originally people paid for the railways out of their own pocket, whereas this time it's the taxpayers' money that is paying for this.
But don't you want to save 25 minutes on that journey time between London and Birmingham?
Personally, I don't know, but I would want to see a proper business case to believe that the money was being spent in the right place, and that, as we've heard tonight, it does not exist at the moment.
There are so many questions. Unfortunately, we're rapidly running out of time. Just very quickly round the table, and I'll start with you, Seb Berry, Independent Councillor. Will this project actually get the go? Will it be built? Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer look at the figures and sign this off?
That was the question you asked Cheryl Gillan. She couldn't give you a straight answer. I can't give you an insider's view from the cabinet either, which of course she should be able to do. What I will say is that the pressure is really mounting on the government. And indeed, you know, prominent Conservative commentators in recent weeks have been speculating
They can't
very
back down.
openly.
What, another U-turn? That's impossible.
Well, there's a long list of U-turns. I think where we're talking about spending this sort of amount of public money, and given what we said right through this programme about the austerity package and the austerity government that we're all living under, you know, I hope very much that they will listen to us.
Adrian Lyons, just unfortunately we're out of time. Yes or no? Will this project be built?
I hope so. If it isn't, though, I think it eventually will be, and will be one of these typical British projects that 40 years or 30 years after it was decided to go ahead, we eventually do.
Martin Tett, will this project see the light of day?
I think the government wants to build it as a cabinet. I think we're winning every single argument on this, and I think the case is disintegrating around them, and I think the JR in November will be a turning point.
Professor Colin Waters, will this project, can you see this project actually being constructed?
As designed at the moment, certainly not. No, there's just not enough information to go ahead on the lines that are being drawn on maps at the moment.
Joe?
There's no way that this should be going ahead whatsoever. It's a colossal waste of money. There simply isn't a case. There's no business case. There's no environmental case. And there is clearly no money to pay for it. Every day, every time we learn something new about HS2, the case gets worse. It's purely being punted by politicians who haven't paid attention and people who will make money out of it. And it must be stopped for the good of this country.